Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. All right, so today we're diving into a classic, Karl Polanyi's The Great Transformation. We're going to use it to really get under the hood of our market society, to understand how this whole thing was actually built and, maybe more importantly, why it seems to create these massive, powerful reactions from people. Okay, so at the very center of Polanyi's whole argument is this one really radical idea, the self-regulating market. The idea of an economic system that just runs itself. It's guided only by prices, and it's supposed to function without any outside interference. It's almost presented to us as a law of nature, right? But Polanyi's big point is, that's not what it is at all, not even close. So to really wrap our heads around this, Polanyi gives us this powerful metaphor. He says, look, don't think of the market as some natural force like the weather. Think of it as something that was built. Think of it as a machine. So that's the big question, right? Is the market just a natural expression of supply and demand? And Polanyi's answer is a hard no.
He argues it's not a natural force at all. It's a machine, a really powerful and, this is key, deliberately constructed machine.
And here's the kicker. This machine is designed to run on a very specific type of fuel. Us, human beings, and nature itself. It's designed to treat human life and the natural world as just fuel to be burned. And this gets us to the absolute core logic of the machine. The fuel it uses are labor, the land we live on, and even money itself. These are what Polanyi calls fictitious commodities. Think about it. These things aren't actually produced to be sold on a market. I mean, human life isn't manufactured, right? Nature isn't a factory product, but the system is designed to pretend they are. It's a massive, necessary fiction, and it has unbelievable consequences. And here's why this matters so much. When you decide to include these things, human beings, nature, in this market mechanism, you're not just making an economic tweak. What you're actually doing is subordinating the very substance of society itself to the laws of the market. You're completely reorganizing how we live to serve the needs of this machine. Okay, so if this is all so dangerous, if you're literally re-engineering society to feed a machine, why on earth would anyone build it in the first place? Well, that brings us to the incentives, the logic of control. Well, for the states and elites who are designing this system, the machine was an incredibly powerful tool. It promised them predictable coordination over huge distances. It gave investors the confidence to make long-term bets. And, maybe most importantly, it offered a way to govern that was depoliticized. You could just say, hey, these aren't my rules. These are just economic laws. And the ultimate enforcement mechanism for all of this? The gold standard. Polanyi called it a gargantuan automaton. I love that phrase. It was basically the master switch designed to make sure national economies would just automatically adjust. No messy politics, no interference. It was the thing that locked this market logic in on a truly global scale. So what happens? What happens when you build a machine that's designed to burn fuel that was never, ever meant to be burned? What happens when that machine starts running way too hot? Well, the outcomes are, as Polanyi shows, brutally predictable. If you treat human beings as nothing more than a commodity called labor, you get massive social dislocation. People's lives are just torn apart. If you treat the earth as a commodity called land, you get ecological stress, defiled landscapes, polluted rivers. And if you treat money as just another thing to be bought and sold, you get wild financial instability that liquidates businesses. See, the system produces these outcomes because its fundamental premise, that you can treat life and nature this way, is just completely unsustainable. And all of this leads to what is probably Polanyi's most famous and brilliant insight, something he called the double movement. It's this idea that as the market machine tries to expand, as it pushes further and further, society inevitably pushes back. It has to, just to protect itself from being completely annihilated. So you have this constant tug of war, right? On one side, you have the market drive, which is always trying to expand its logic to cover everything. And on the other side, you have this social response, this push from pretty much everyone to create safeguards to protect people, nature, and the economy itself. And that's why we see things like labor laws and trade unions pop up. It's why we have environmental regulations. It's even why we have central banking. Polanyi says these aren't some anti-market conspiracy. No. They are the organic, spontaneous safeguards that society builds to literally keep the machine from destroying itself. Which, of course, raises a huge question. If this machine is so obviously flawed, if it constantly generates its own resistance, why does the ideal of a pure, self-regulating market stick around? Why is it so persistent? Well, this is what brings us to the crisis in perception. And here, Polanyi just drops this absolute bombshell. He says, laissez-faire was planned, planning was not. Think about what that means. The so-called natural free market, it required massive, centrally planned state power to bring it into being and keep it going. But all those protections, all that planning to save society, that stuff was spontaneous. And that is the crisis in perception. It's when we mistake the outcomes of this machine for natural laws, like gravity or something. We completely ignore the institutional design, the political choices, the sheer force that was required to build it in the first place. We're taught to see the results as inevitable, when in fact, they're just the product of a very specific human-made architecture. So once you have this framework, you realize it's not just about history. It's like having a special lens that lets you see the DNA of the global systems that we're all dealing with right now. You start to see this double movement playing out everywhere. The push for more and more globalization, that's the market drive. The existence of welfare states, that's the protective counter-movement. Debates over financial regulation, dealing with environmental limits, legitimacy crises where people feel the system is unjust, it's all there. Polanyi's framework helps us map the fundamental tensions that define our world today. And ultimately, Polanyi's work leaves us with this incredibly powerful question. What if the so-called laws of the market aren't laws at all? What if they're just choices? Because if they're choices, that means we have the power to choose differently. Once we see the market for what it is, a design system, we can actually start to have a real conversation about how we might want to redesign it for our own well-being and for the planet's. Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.